I've got a real soft spot for heretics and people who carve their own path outside of the institutions and societal norms and things that everyone is so pressured into, because it creates this echo chamber and there's these cookie cutter outcomes. It's not conducive to getting to new ideas. It's not good for figuring out new things, how to discover how the world works and invent new things. And so it's always a real privilege to spend time with a true heretic, and today we're hanging out with Garret Lisi. So Garrett has his own unified theory of particle physics, combining that with Einstein's theory of gravitation. Garrett's been slagged by the scientific community for this, even though nobody's managed to do a really good job of proving he's wrong. And I think it's a really great story. You don't need to know anything about these topics to be interested in this conversation. It's a lot less about the science. You can learn about that independently if you want. What we're really doing is discussing his experience of what it's like trying to bring a new idea from outside the ivory tower of academia, especially in a field that has been trying really hard for 40, 50 years now with very little to show for it, with string theory and these other things that soaked up a lot of the resources and attention and didn't really get us where we thought we wanted to go. No disrespect to the people who tried, but we need new ideas and we need to work on those too. This is a case where the credentialism, the established folks in the scientific community exhibited pretty poor behavior and really tried to shut down an idea in the wrong way instead of doing it the right way, which is to just come up with one that's better. Garrett is a super fascinating guy. If you are interested in figuring out how to live a life of surfing and snowboarding and doing a little bit of stock trading and not having to fit into the corporate world, this is a great conversation for you, because Garrett's been doing that for his whole career. He's living off of stocks he started trading in high school. I'm going to link to a couple of things that Garrett has written, his papers and things, but also I'm going to link to a YouTube video by Sabine Hassenfelder, who you may recognize now. She's getting huge on YouTube, but she's doing a great job of explaining physics. She has an episode that I really like where she discusses some of the problem with the scientific establishment from her perspective as well.
I've never met anyone like it.
He could hack anybody's phone in a matter of minutes. Who is that guy? Who can do that?
Thomas is the most interesting man in the world.
He's one of my favorite people on the planet. Inventor.
Wicked smart.
The master of cutting corners.
If you had a dead body in your trunk, who would you call?
He would get arrested immediately in a lineup.
I stood in line to get his autograph.
You know, his mouth can barely keep up to his brain.
I don't actually know what Pablos does.
A hacker magician.
Man of the future. Future.
Often some monkey will have over-tightened them.
Yeah, and the thing is, cars are mostly reliable, and you have so much help these days that like people don't learn to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
And like, so unfortunately,
They're selling cars now without spares.
I know, right? We had this fucking rental car like 2 weeks ago. We went to Whistler. I got some kind of, I don't know, tire popped. The car had like 600 miles on it. Brand new car. Tire pops. I had to buy 4 new tires for the fucking rental car. It's all-wheel drive bullshit. Anyway, whatever. I think we'll get reimbursed for it, but it's just dumb shit to deal with.
The rental car company I would have thought they would handle that for you.
I don't know. We were in the middle of nowhere, like on our way to Whistler. So we went to the nearest tire shop in Podunk, Washington. And
You didn't want to wait for the rental car company to send out a rescue vehicle.
I called them, and all they would do, they would send a rescue vehicle, but then the rescue vehicle just drives through a tire shop. I don't know. We'll deal with it.
This is a good place to start. I think this is endemic in our culture right now, and it's sort of indicative of the collapse of society, where you have corporations that are, they have thinner and thinner margins.
Sure.
And in order to make their profit, they have to milk more and more out of their customers. In order to do that, they have to deliver what they're legally required to deliver, but not more. And then try to get you on any extras they possibly can. So they're always trying to upsell you. Mm-hmm. So the American consumer now is sort of living in this, on one side, it's a utopia. On the other side, it's a dystopia, because you have all these options available to you, but every option comes with all these little things where they're trying to nickel and dime you for higher prices
Yeah.
and delivering less quality with what they're giving you. They're trying to give you the bare minimum that they can get away with. The accountants have gotten into every large company and shaved pennies everywhere they could. And this is, I mean, it's really a weird state to be in, especially if you're, I mean, it used to be like you join some airline miles club and you'd get upgrades and things were great and you get points. But now, once again, the accountants have gotten in there. So there's all this gamemanship.
Right.
And so it's a losing proposition for the most part. And you're better off just buying the cheapest ticket.
I had this weird sensibility, which is like, I don't ever want to buy anything that's on sale. Because I assume, and I don't want to join any membership programs.
Yeah.
I don't want points for anything because I just assume one way or another, they're like trapping me into what's going to be a less choice and a bad deal for me. And, you know, I have a Chinese girlfriend, so obviously I have to get things on sale.
Right.
She doesn't care what I buy or how much I spend as long as I get a deal.
Yeah, no, that's girl math. She's saving you money by doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think there's a couple ways this can be sliced, but I, you know, even the one mileage point thing I do is airline because I need it just for the seat upgrades.
Right.
And because I travel so much, it really is valuable for that. And even they play all those games, like you said, it can't even pick your seat unless you have status. I'm like, Jesus.
Exactly.
So
it was actually hilarious during COVID when the planes were empty, but they were legally required to still be flying between airports by U.S. government regulations. And so the airlines just got really desperate. Yeah. And they took away, it's like no change fees. You know, they got really nice for a year.
Mm-hmm. That was great. I traveled. I'd have like a whole, you know, jumbo jet to myself. It was amazing.
Yeah. But dirtbag first class where you have the 4 coach seats in a row, you know.
Dirtbag first class. I know. Oh God. That's not what it used to be. Someone I was talking to yesterday was regaling me of tales of flying on Pan Am back in the 60s. And
when they had a lounge in the plane.
Yeah. He said that the plane, you know, they had this plane that would go around the world and it would just make stops all the way. And you could stay on it for as long as you want and get off wherever you want. And at each stop, the crew would zip off to the local market to buy the ingredients to cook on the next leg of the flight. Can you imagine?
Yeah, no, it's a little different now.
So, okay. So let's dig into this. So we optimized this notion of corporate profits. We, in some sense, made things egalitarian because anybody can invest in these corporations now. Yeah. But they are essentially beholden to, you know, trying to continually grow because the value to the investors is in the market cap of the company. And so they have to grow it. And now we have these. It seemed like it was less than 10 years ago when we had the first $100 billion companies.
And then suddenly we're
above
trillions.
Yeah, crazy.
Well, a lot of that is just that a lot of middle-class Americans wisened up to just how much potential is in the stock market to grow your money. Mm-hmm. It used to be that someone would just keep their money in a savings account.
Right.
But then banks got so greedy that the interest that banks used to give like 5% interest.
I remember it was more than that when I was a kid.
Now you go to a savings account and even though the prime rate is up above that, a bank will still only give you not even 1% interest on your savings or checking account. It's absurd. So putting money in stocks, where stocks on average go up 15% a year. Right. It's like the opposite of gambling, where the house is more likely to pay out money on your bets.
But that 15% now becomes the baseline of growth that every company needs to hit. Yeah. And if they don't hit it, then they get heavily penalized in the market. And so
they got to keep the earnings up.
So the only ways a typical company could make 15% growth would be to get 15% more customers than last year or cut costs for the same exact thing by 15% so they don't lose sales. There's not a lot of levers to pull there. Right. If you can
that's why corporations seem so cutthroat internally, where they're always trying to cut employees and cut expenses because their margins are thin. Yeah. For any large company.
Margins are thin when you have competitors. Yeah. And you have to try to fight for the market share.
Yeah. If you're trailblazing a new area, then, you know, you're a pioneer and you get the arrows, but you also get very large profit margins and you can do really well. Tesla was doing great for the first decade, but now they've got all these competitors and they're having to drop their prices and they're not doing as well sales and they're getting negative growth for the first time and that's killing their stock.
Do you think it's weird because I remember Tesla along the way being kind of adamant that they wanted a electric vehicle industry that didn't want to be the only player.
Right.
That, they did the gambit where they tried to give away their patents or make them available for everyone. I don't know how that played out. Probably reduced litigation, hopefully, in the industry. But did it make sense that they did that?
I think it makes sense.
Now that they have the competitors?
The reason I think it makes sense domestically
Yeah.
is because what ended up happening is everybody adopted their chargers.
Okay.
So just recently, I think this gambit worked because Ford and all these other EV manufacturers said, okay, your chargers are good. We'll give up on these 20 different charge standards and we'll just use the Tesla chargers. We'll go ahead and use your chargers. And I think that's a result of what they originally did, is opening up their standards.
How does that help Tesla at all? Do they make money off the chargers?
It means there'll be more Tesla chargers around.
There'll be more Tesla chargers, but if all the cars use them, then as a customer, I don't care.
You do care, because if you're making any trip across the country, I mean, Sam and I found this out. If we're trying to get from point A to point B, and point A to point B might be, 250 miles between the two. If you don't have a charger in between there, you're not going to make it.
Well, right. But if I have a, Ford that uses Tesla chargers,
right,
and there's a Tesla charger, then it's equivalent. There's no reason for me to buy a Tesla to be compatible with that network anymore.
Right. It just means there will be more chargers around that you can use.
Yeah, for any brand. It's not a specific advantage for Tesla anymore.
It's not. But it raises the tide, and
do they charge a licensing fee? I mean, if they're giving away the patents, are they charging a licensing fee from Ford? Or
they do charge for the use of their charger.
They charge for the use of the charger.
Yeah. And that allows them to build more.
But and it allows them to build more, and it means Ford doesn't have to build chargers.
That's
they
right.
can just make cars like they always did.
Yeah.
So then there's this question of whether, I guess the only real remaining question is like whether Tesla, being so modern, can make cars that are better or cheaper or in a more efficient fashion than any of the incumbents who've been at it for a century.
And I think for the past 5 years, they have been, because of the incredible automation in their factories. And that gave them a huge leg up in the industry and gave them a really good profit margin for that 5 years. But now the Chinese are coming in with their cheaply built cars that are still high quality. And
do they use as much automation or just more labor?
Cheap labor.
Cheap labor.
Yeah.
Labor in China isn't cheap anymore like it was.
Right. It has risen.
Huh. But they probably use the cheap labor to build robots, to build factories, to build cars.
Exactly.
I remember like in the 90s thinking, well, we could course correct on this Asian labor thing someday because we're going to build robots. Then I realized they're just building all the robots in Asia.
That's right. That's right.
I'm not so sure that we're going to get ahead.
Why don't you just go direct and just get the cheap labor?
Yeah.
Instead of the Chinese built robot.
Pretty soon they probably won't want to sell us their robots either.
Well, yeah, we're having more and more tension with China, mostly over Taiwan.
Yeah, the chips matter a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything else from Taiwan matters, unfortunately. I'm sure they have cultural gems that they're proud of, but the chips are probably eclipsing all that.
Yeah. And it's surprising to me how that's not at the forefront of every investor's brain.
I know.
Just how TSMC is all the best chips.
That we can handle. It's the geopolitical problem with that we have no way of calibrating for.
Yeah.
You really have no way of calibrating for that.
Yeah.
Do you think it's...
Well, also the U.S. is in this position where they said that, the U.S. has not even officially acknowledged Taiwan as an independent nation from China. We treat it as it is, and it's sort of half, and other countries have, but we're in this really weird position.
It's more than a semantic argument, I suppose. Well, I think China's been very heavy-handed about trying to make sure that didn't happen, and probably the window of opportunity where we probably could have, cleaned that up would have been over almost a decade ago. And now
No, I think we're going that way. I think the way this will unfold is either China will invade and just, heavy-handedly take over the nation, and that's a conflict they might not win, because they can't do it just with like drones and missiles alone. They have to get boots on the ground and actually have infantry take over the country. And the only way to do that pretty much is to land troops with marine landing craft on the south side and then push forward from there. because the rest of the island is all too mountainous.
Okay.
So their main port and access is all on the south side. So I was reading up about recent, basically war games where they ran simulations on the computers, and that was the main weak point
On Whopper.
So that was the main weak point of the Chinese invasion of Taiwan, is the vulnerability of the landing craft on the south shore. And for that reason, the Chinese are aware of this too. Look at our media too. So they also see that, okay, if this unfolds, we probably might not win this conflict if we try to do it, and it would be hugely expensive politically to do it. And so this whole thing hinges on this. And I think this is why TSM stock is so low.
For sure.
But because, NVIDIA's gone through the roof.
Yeah.
And the AI boom is taking over, and we don't know how this thing is going, but we know it's going to be huge.
It's crazy though, because TSMC is the back end for NVIDIA.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and that's not
like,
investors' minds. And
right.
So
it's like one step removed, so we're fine with it.
No.
It's wild. Do you think it's unreasonable? I know
I'm all in on TSM stock.
Yeah. Cool.
That's
great.
One of my biggest bets.
Well, I think in my mind, it would be better to be all in on the ASML stock.
Yeah, ASML, because they make the equipment that goes into the fabs that are being built. The problem is ASML is it a Norwegian company?
It's in the Netherlands.
Yeah, in the Netherlands. Yeah. Okay. The problem is they don't have the same intense capitalistic growth vibe.
Yeah. Which is bizarre, because they apparently don't need it.
Yeah.
And whatever philosophy got them there is probably being ratified by the fact that
it's like they're quite happy to get a lot of money.
$50 billion of back orders for their machine. The machine costs $400 million. They can sell as many as they can make.
It's like, we're growing at an acceptable rate. We're good.
No competitors.
It's not like the American version of we're going to 1,000x it.
The weird thing is no one wants to talk about it, but ASML's technology, even though the world basically figured out who they are in the last year, technology is basically end of life. Like, they use extreme UV. Yep. They're trying to do this wide aperture thing, which is like a way to eke out a tiny bit more resolution out of it.
Trying to make bigger chips.
But there's no
chips with
roadmap from there. So it's a very interesting point in time where, like, they probably should have a market cap that's 4 times as big. Yeah. But they're just this
kind of a modest European company.
There you go.
European companies.
They're probably bigger than the GDP of Netherlands already. God, bizarre. Okay, so the politically incorrect thing I'm thinking, which I wonder what you think about this, is that essentially the U.S. funded building China into what it is now.
Yeah. And now we're trying to deprive them of nutrients.
Well, it's almost as if, I don't know, I feel like they're trying to repel us from investing in China at this point.
You think so?
Well, a lot of the moves that the government has made in China are very hostile towards American investment.
I thought it was just more tit for tat.
Well, I guess, do you start with the tits or the tats? I don't know. Which came first? Yeah, I don't know. It seems to me
I don't care for tits with tats, but
yeah. Good to know. I think there's it almost feels like there's this amazing progression that happened in China. They were able to dramatically bring themselves out of this situation with so much poverty. They became a market player on the world stage. Yeah. We all, basically gave them industries. We, bought stuff from those industries as aggressively as we possibly could for half a century or more now. And they were able to become the nation that they are, which is like super respected, super powerful. Everyone's dependent on them. Everyone's loving them. And
but I think,
and then they threw it all away.
Looking back into Chinese history,
yeah,
you go back and China was the center of the civilized world
in their minds
for thousands of years. Yeah. And through internal conflicts and struggles, and then when contact was made with the West, they weren't doing so hot. Mm-hmm. So, but from the long Chinese history, this is more of a return of Chinese supremacy.
I get that they believe that that's their rightful position on Earth.
Yeah. Sort of like Russia believes they're the rightful owners of Ukraine. Thing. Yeah. Or at least Putin does.
Yeah. And I don't know, probably Iran thinks they're the center of the universe, or should be. Hell, you go to Rome and they still think they're the center of the universe. Yeah. They haven't done jack shit for 1,000 years. So it's kind of a, I don't know.
They make pretty stuff though, the Italians. Yeah.
Yeah, they make some pretty stuff. I don't know. I guess I feel like we sort of never got to take credit for our role in making China what it is. But do you think that there's a...
Well, that's because, I mean, the normal U.S. way is to go to war with a country and then rehabilitate it. So sort of historically, the best thing you could do as a country is to lose a war against the U.S. then you do.
It worked for Japan. It worked for Germany.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's working for Afghanistan and Iraq, but
you know, if they let it, but they're resistant to our culture.
Well, we're about to find out if it works for. Okay, so going back to the fundamental structure of American economy being these corporations need to grow at 15% a year. I can see how if you just extrapolate an exponential like that forever, that seems intractable. So something's got to give.
Well, you expand into the solar system and beyond.
So maybe we can keep expanding.
Especially with the American growth-oriented mindset.
Yeah,
that's sort of the only domain left. Although, the untapped resources and land in the U.S. alone is vast.
It's insane.
There's so much empty space. There's so much space that you could put just giant solar farms.
We've got
produce
space,
vast amounts of energy.
We have arable land. We have apparently unlimited fracking potential.
And our population is declining.
Yeah, there's plenty of room for everyone.
Yeah, the only reason it's going up is because of immigration.
So do you think there's some other possible positive track besides just stick with perpetual growth? Like, can we back out of this situation?
Perpetual growth was the sort of the story for humankind for the past 100,000 years. And we had this Malthusian apocalypse looming ahead where we would just pack the planet with people and it would be a total hellscape with depletion of resources with too many people. But that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is with increasing education that lowers birth rates and the populations decline.
Yeah.
And the only places where populations are going up is where there's a cultural motivation for more kids.
Right.
And
Mormons and South Americans a little bit, some Africans.
Yeah. And
I think we're all going to be Mormon in like another few generations.
Hey,
right? Oh, you guys live in Salt Lake.
We have a place in Salt Lake City.
Oh, yeah, good.
I love Mormons. They're great.
They're so delightful.
On that.
I love them too. They make great cookies. What's not to like? Role model humans.
But what we're going to see is, so how do you have increasing growth with the declining population? And that seems inevitable. Yeah. That's what we need to do. And
any good models for that so far?
Can be the computers that are driving this.
Okay, but just pause on that one sec. What about like Japan peaked a while ago.
Yeah.
And oddly, if you go to Japan, it seems like a delightful place to be.
Yeah, they're unlocked bicycles in the middle of the city.
It's crazy like how nice it is being in Tokyo, even though like the whole economy must be in decline. I don't understand.
Well, they had deflation for 20 years, but now they're getting into a more reasonable inflationary economy slightly.
I wish I understood.
And I'm not exactly sure why. I don't think they are either.
But like Russia peaked out on population growth a while ago.
Yeah.
I don't know how things are faring there, but people say Moscow is delightful. At least the Russians say that.
Well, they're sending all the young men to war, though.
That's a way to accelerate the deceleration of growth, I guess.
Yeah, killing your people.
And then we got South Korea, which basically overnight stopped having kids.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on there. They're doing great with the K-pop, but other than that, what's the plan for South Korea?
Really, really good video games. Yeah.
Good video games. So maybe one of and this is part of why I love having so many different countries and cultures, is like somebody might figure it out. Like maybe Japan will pave the way for us to say.
I hate to say this, but I hope it's not Islam. They're just so misogynistic, it drives me up the wall.
Well, that's just a developmental stage.
I hope so.
Do you think that, so what I've been imagining, which is probably naive, is that one way or another will eventually transition to an economy where the computers are buying and selling and trading from each other.
Yes, in the form of corporations.
Okay, maybe it's just...
So once we have AGIs that are more intelligent than humans, we'll start with the condition where the humans own everything. The humans are all the shareholders.
Okay.
The company and their shareholders in these companies, and these companies have these giant data centers, GPUs, banks,
to
the hilt, and they have an AGI And they realize that if they can put their corporation under the control of this AGI, which has its tentacles everywhere,
it'll perform better.
It can perform much better than the humans and maximize shareholder value.
Yeah.
So it'll be this weird case where the humans still maintain, ownership of real estate and companies, but then more and more control will actually be under these corporations, which are machine run. And it's going to be expensive in terms of power to run these machines, also in terms of power and hardware. So at that point, eventually, since the machines are more intelligent, they'll figure out a way to transfer more and more wealth to these corporations that are run by machines that will end up owning things. So we'll have this sort of gilded age of human luxury where we get all of this awesome stuff because there's much more intelligence in charge of running companies and the planet. And so it's a great time to invest in, whatever you can that you think will grow under this sort of environment, like TSM, if they don't get invaded by China. And that's the future of the economy. So it's the computers that are going to grow.
So my slight variation on that is not predicated on AGI. I think that the computers are very useful and valuable at making corporations run better even now if they're put to good use.
Yeah.
So even if you didn't get to the poorly defined milestone of AGI, you would still have these computational models that are very powerful and very useful. And I'm quite convinced of all that. The truth is we probably have some corporations at this point that are pretty close to that, where you're making decisions that are probably ratified by humans, but they are highly informed by what the computers are telling them would be good choices.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of goes back to Excel, but now the models are much more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And so I think we could really be in this point where, the way I think about it, the businesses could just run much better than they are.
Yeah.
So that 15% we need might not have to come from getting more customers. It comes from making less dumb decisions. And now we get more efficient. We get higher quality. We get better prices. We get everything that we want, but without having to grow the market of humans.
And we can also increase the access to resources.
Right.
So build out larger solar plants on the earth.
Yeah.
So harvest more energy for solar.
Yeah.
For the power we need. Expand into the solar system. Do asteroid harvesting. Start building stuff out in the solar system. That's the other thing about having machine brains is they're not as susceptible to cosmic rays. Meat is not happy in space.
Right.
So you can't send an astronaut out into space for more than a few years because the radiation will kill them with cancer almost certainly.
I mean, chips don't love it either, but we can shield them. If you shield the meat, it works fine in space too. Well, you get a lead window, just like the rest of us. Okay, well, it's interesting if you sort of get rid of all the romantic notions about people and what they need, and just break it down. I like to frame it as if people are just I would always say, we're all made of stars, because it sounds poetic, but it's literally true. We're made of energy that comes from one star in particular.
Well, it's the matter. I mean, originally in the universe, it was all hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium.
Okay.
And the only place the fancy molecules came from, carbon, is from inside stars.
Right. So
where the fusion was happening.
So the hydrogen fuses, becomes helium. The helium fuses, becomes carbon.
And then with a supernova, a lot of the stuff gets compressed and you get all the heavier elements.
And that's where we get our uranium and lead and everything.
Yeah.
And then, isn't it crazy to think about the insane amount of energy it took to make lead?
Right.
And it's, market price is absurdly low.
Right.
Compared to gold, which is basically the same thing.
It's more precious and more shiny.
Yeah, we just have less of it and it's more shiny.
Yeah, no.
You can make lead pretty shiny.
Well, it's so funny for me when it's why would you buy Bitcoin when you can buy something tangible like gold that has value? And it's gold's not that great. It's really soft and spongy as metals go. And it's good for radiation shielding, sure. But
and conductor.
But it's not super valuable as a useful material. It's just that humans decide they like it.
If you think of it as being made of energy, then Bitcoin is basically the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's something that humans have decided as a medium of exchange or holding value. Yeah. And in my mind, Bitcoin's much better at that.
Well, there is
it goes across borders much easily.
Yeah, for sure. A different thing. There's a utility, an industrial utility in gold that does seem to have some effect on its market value.
It is.
right?
It's useful.
We use tens of billions of dollars a year of gold.
Yeah.
For electronics and things, and we don't have something
Silver
better.
also is
Silver too, yeah.
that way.
So, if you think of humans as being made of energy,
Yeah.
then you just add up like how much energy is a good life versus a mediocre life,
Right.
versus a great life. And
Right.
I've been using, Nathan Myhrvold came up with this, but I've been using this example of toasters. So if you just take toasters and add up how many toasters worth of energy you get,
Right.
the average globally is like one toaster
Yeah.
running 24/7, like super glue the button down, run it 24/7. That's
Yeah.
how much energy a human gets for all their heating, cooling, travel, food, etc. And then you start looking at the averages and how they play out. Americans get 9 toasters.
Yeah.
So
That's hilarious.
yeah, Americans get 9 toasters, and
I'm pretty sure you and I are running on a whole lot more toasters.
for sure toaster range or something. And I love it. My life is pretty
Yeah.
great. And I know people
Most of my toasters are solar powered, so I'm a little bit happier
Good.
that way.
yeah, good.
Still, these things, we're dumping a lot of carbon into the atmosphere and it's going to bite us in the ass eventually. So
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. I keep trying to come up with a good analogy for that. My best so far is like, okay, your neighbor's dog shits on your porch, and you can hose it off and that's fine. But like, then all the other neighbors' dogs start shitting on your porch,
Yeah.
and it becomes a problem. Like, why would you just keep doing that?
yeah,
let's
tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, we got to come up with some better analogy than that. But
I hopefully the super intelligent machine overlords will solve that one in a
they may well, like
in a way that doesn't result in killing all humans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of these amazing things is we'll be able to figure out
Also, I
pretty
think
soon now.
for global warming, the solutions such as dumping sulfur into the upper atmosphere
Yeah.
to have less sunlight hitting the surface
Yeah.
to lower the temperature. Solutions like that aren't very appealing right now.
Yeah.
Because they don't seem very green.
Yeah.
But I think solutions like that will become more appealing when the problem
Yeah.
gets worse.
Yeah, I think a level of desperation is required. That's one we worked on at the Intellectual Ventures Lab. So back in 2008-9, we were trying to invent ways of putting sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And at the time, geoengineering didn't even have a bad name yet. It was just like taboo. Nobody would talk about it. It was easy to dismiss it because all the ideas cost trillions of dollars. So they were just non-starters. So we went out and tried to show a couple ideas that were so cheap you couldn't ignore them. And that kind of worked. I mean, it changed as far as changing the conversation. So now at least geoengineering has to be...
It entered the Overton window,
Yeah.
I guess is the way of saying it. Yeah.
Right. So it gets considered. But yeah, still nobody likes it.
They will.
And it is kind of a plan C, unfortunately,
I
will
guess
be
it's gonna
required.
become plan A because the other alternatives aren't.
Yeah.
great. I mean, carbon sequestration is greener, but it's more expensive or harder, more labor intensive.
I think carbon sequestration is a non-starter if you don't solve energy.
Yeah.
Like you gotta, I mean, going back to the toaster analogy, 3 billion people live on less than one toaster.
Yeah, but people like more toasters.
They do, and they deserve them. I think and that's the thing I think is missing from the conversation. It's disingenuous for Americans to say like, "Oh, you guys are fine with one
Half a
toaster.
toaster for you."
Yeah, have a toaster for you. I'm just going to stick here with 9.
Yeah.
And I think that it also shows that people are being disingenuous about the real demand. Like the real demand globally is like 10x global energy production.
Yeah.
Nobody is saying that. Nobody's trying to make that many windmills. And so until we hit something like that where everyone could have the lifestyle or, quality of life of an American.
Well, it's going to all go solar, wind, fusion.
That's what you think?
Yeah. I mean, right now the oil companies are still doing great.
Yeah.
Like Exxon just had their best year
For sure.
in a long time. And that's exacerbated
With
by,
no end
by
in sight.
war. Also, a little bit of the luster has been lost from the EVs.
Yeah.
At least for
now.
Domestically. People have decided that, well, not everybody has a garage with a charger.
Right.
And the range is not fantastic. So they're more expensive typically for EVs. So that market is taking a little bit of a dip, even though it was going like gangbusters for a while.
Yeah.
It has to, but as batteries will keep getting cheaper
Yeah.
Electric power will keep getting cheaper. EVs will eventually win.
Yeah.
It's just people are living a little too much in the future, and now they'll pull back a little bit until tech catches up, and then they'll get there for real. So it's sort of like the case with VR.
VR.
It's like there's a lot of hype around VR for a long time, and it's like you try it, it's like, oh wow, this is awesome. Oh wait, I feel sick. I feel nauseous because the frame rate's not high enough.
Yeah,
the resolution's not high enough.
Yeah.
But tech catches up.
Yeah.
And it seems like computer technology it touches.
Yeah.
Also gets the benefits of its exponential
for sure.
improvement curve.
Yeah.
So, entertainment, when tech touches entertainment, and you end up with VR headsets, and they seem clunky at first, but every 5 years they get you a 10x improvement, or more.
Mm-hmm.
And then things get real.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been amazing. So that's sort of what let me live the lifestyle I do, is investing in tech companies at a young age.
Okay.
That's what let me, not work and basically work on theoretical physics as much as I want, and play around in the world surfing and snowboarding, paragliding, and having a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah. Great.
I've just sort of hitched my financial wagon to tech companies doing well and growth, and off it went.
Yeah. You could basically distill almost everything right now that advances to energy and processing with chips.
Yeah.
Like those are the two things where if you can dramatically improve things by applying more, by reducing the cost, making it cleaner. In the case of chips, growing the computational capacities, making everything possible, and then and that's a driver for everything else. You can use it to make everything better. And what's exciting,
but we're also, with AI, we're seeing a whole nother industrial revolution.
Yeah, totally.
Where it's
a renaissance.
Whereas with this one, we don't know if we're going to be in charge after it.
Yeah, I it's harder to convince me of that one, but yeah, it's definitely going to change what humans are capable of, and unfortunately, like our monkey brains don't seem to have evolved as quickly. There's no Moore's law for monkey brains,
right? No,
and so we're
there certainly is not.
So the same kinds of the same organs are used to make decisions, whether they're empowered with machine guns or supercomputers,
nuclear weapons, or sharp pointy sticks.
Yeah. Do you think this lifestyle you described of being able to invest in those things that you thought would grow is a repeatable experiment, or did you get lucky?
I'd say I got lucky, but I seem to get pretty consistently lucky over
good.
the last 40 years.
Yeah, good. Okay. And when did you decide that's what you wanted to do?
It was my father's fault.
Oh.
When I was like 12, 13 years old, I was a really spoiled little punk as a kid, because my one set of grandparents were ahead of the curve, and that they got divorced and then they got remarried. And then
so you get twice as many grandparents.
Yeah. And then not just twice.
Oh.
And then my biological mother passed away when I was a baby, and then my father remarried.
Oh.
So I ended up with 8 grandparents as a little kid.
Wow.
And so I would get all these gifts for my birthdays, Christmas. I would get all these gifts, and older people, they would just write you a check.
Right.
And my father is like, no, you don't want candy.
Yeah.
You want to take this and put it in stocks.
Right.
Buy stock in the candy companies.
Yeah.
So the first one was like Tofuti, which is like the soy-based frozen yogurt or something that swept the country in the 80s. So I think so my father would help me invest in these stocks. And this was back in newspapers. So I'd open up newspapers and look at how the stocks went up and down. And 16, my first real job was flipping burgers at McDonald's.
Yeah.
In San Diego.
Yeah, I did that too.
And I'd work my ass off, and minimum wage was $3.42.
Yeah.
I'd work my ass off all day. I'd make $28, and I'd come back and I'd exhausted. I'd open the newspaper, and it's like, oh, my stocks are up $400. Oh, my stocks are down $800. And there was just a huge disconnect between what the stock market money was doing, which seemed like a game.
Yeah.
But it was, and then I was making like peanuts.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like, I just want to do this. I just want to play with stocks. I never want to flip a burger again unless it's for friends.
Yeah. Amazing.
So yeah, I ended up investing most of my money in a small, obscure fruit company called Apple. So that did pretty well.
Yeah. Looking good for a little while there in the early 90s.
Yeah.
90s.
No, the Gil Amelio age.
Did you stick with it?
I didn't.
Okay.
So because what happened is, I had to pay for college.
Yeah.
Which really set me back at $455 a quarter.
Yeah. It's expensive. College was expensive in those days. That's why I didn't go.
and living expenses and so forth. But then in the 90s, I did well in school. So in physics, I got a Regents Fellowship, which means I not only got paid as a TA, but they also gave me money for this Regents Fellowship to encourage me to go to UC San Diego.
Okay.
So instead of going to some fancier school, it's like, go to UC San Diego, we'll give you a ton of money. And I'm like, all right, I'll take the money.
Yeah.
So I took the money. First thing I did in graduate school was buy a next station cover.
Yeah. I was a Next developer.
So this was the machine that Steve Jobs made when he got kicked out of Apple. He started Next and Pixar.
Yeah.
And these Next machines, as you remember, just freaking
they were awesome.
Amazing machines.
Awesome.
So I'm using that to do my computer simulations for my dissertation in physics.
Okay.
And what happened is Gil Amelio was driving Apple into the ground because they opened up the Apple hardware for other companies to make Apple hardware, and they'd just be a software company.
Yeah.
But their software was crap.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a horrible tragedy. Like System 7 was just bad.
It was terrible. I remember. So it's like,
So when they made the announcement that Apple was going to buy Next for $400 million,
I remember.
And Steve Jobs was coming back in.
I was just,
and I'm like, that's not what's going on. What's going on is Next just bought Apple for negative $400 million.
Yep.
Steve Jobs and Abby Tavanian, and the real thing is Next Step, the operating system for the OS. That's going to become Apple's next operating system. That's OS 10.
Yeah.
And I know it rocks because I've been using a Next Station for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So that's when I put all my money into Apple stock.
Wow, like, amazing. So perfect.
But the reason why it was luck is because of the iPod.
It was the iPod.
And the iPhone. That's what, and I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, of course, no one did.
That's why my Apple stock going up. I just have to attribute it to luck. It's
iPod turned them around. But it was an amazing difference. I mean, using a Next machine in those days compared to System 7 was just like, I mean, you felt like you had superpowers.
You were literally living in the future. Because we're still using OS 10
now. That's what, that same OS runs your iPhone.
Yeah.
It's wild.
So every once in a while,
it was a beautiful moment.
If you're a geek and you're in tune with what's going on, you can see into the future a little better.
Yeah.
And as a stock investor, you capitalize the hell out of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's cool that worked out for you. So what happened with the UCSD fellowship?
Oh, well, I was living at the beach in La Jolla, surfing wind and sea all the time, doing my research, really loving general relativity and particle physics.
Okay.
And also dynamical chaos.
Get into those things.
Well, I've always been good at math. And when I found out that math works to describe how our universe works, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm living in a fantasy novel where real magic exists.
Yeah.
And but the language of the universe is mathematics, which is sort of like this magical language that you have to be a mage to immerse yourself and understand, because it's not a human created thing. Mathematics is the language of the universe, and humans just manage to access it by playing with it and thinking about it and doing advanced common sense with numbers and then equations. And we end up with this access to this magical language underlying the universe, and then exploit it and use it through engineering to build awesome stuff. But to find out that there is this language underlying the universe, I'm like, okay, what's the complete set of rules?
Okay.
Right? What is the fundamental underlying mathematics under how this stuff works? And I found out it's mathematics of geometry.
Right.
So with Einstein's general relativity, found out it's pseudo-Riemannian four-dimensional manifolds curving to funny shapes, and that's what gives us gravity. And if you tack extra dimensions and go to 5 dimensions, you get electromagnetism along with gravity. That's called Kaluza-Klein theory.
Okay.
Right after Einstein came up with that, they added some dimensions and got the other forces.
Okay.
And you can get all the forces that way. You can get the weak force, the strong force. So our universe is fundamentally mathematically geometric that way. And I came to understand and appreciate that in graduate school through differential geometry and general relativity graduate classes. And then when I'm taking particle physics classes, it uses a lot of that same geometry for the forces.
Okay.
But for matter, for like electrons, quarks, neutrinos, it's different.
Yeah.
It's not the same sort of curving geometrical spaces that gravity and the other forces are.
Yeah.
It's sort of this other sort of directions that sort of awkwardly wrap around these geometries.
Okay.
And it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So literally, when you look at the mathematics of an electron, which is described by the Dirac equation in quantum field theory, it's basically a column matrix of 4 complex numbers that transforms a certain way under rotations. And this thing's called a spinner.
Okay.
And the mathematics of spinners is pretty obscure. And if you're sitting here with this geometric toolkit, you don't know why you'd reach way over here and grab spinners and add it on. So matter, electrons and quarks and some for seem to be, sort of awkwardly glued on to general relativity and these other forces.
Okay.
And that bothered the hell out of me in graduate school.
Okay.
I'm like, there's got to be a more geometric description for spinners and matter generally. And so I started, even though I was sort of all over the place, I've always been more of a generalist.
Okay.
And so I was doing research in dynamical chaos, and I had an advisor, Henry Barbanel, who was advising me, and we were doing lots of fun fluid dynamic stuff and like stuff for the Navy and, submarines and drag reduction and sound reduction and turbulent boundary layer flow. But at the same time, I was really in love with general relativity and geometric description of particle physics, and wanted to get really at what the fundamental mathematical laws of the universe are. Yeah. And it's quantum field theory and general relativity, but those don't really play nice together. And the electrons are sort of glued in. Okay. So I was sort of in both fields. And while I was dabbling with quantum field theory, I found I used the tools from nonlinear dynamics and computers, my next, to numerically model solutions in quantum field theory that are called solitons. And what a soliton is basically it's a quantum field that interacts with itself.
Okay. Like an eddy current.
Yeah, sort of like an eddy current, but in the nonlinear equations of quantum field theory. So the Navier-Stokes equations, which control fluid flow, are what describe eddy currents. And similarly, we have like the Maxwell-Dirac equations, which control electromagnetism interacting with electrons, say. Okay. So how an electron emits an electromagnetic field that then interacts with the electron again. So that's a nonlinear set of equations. It's a self-interacting set. Okay. And in certain self-interacting sets of equations, you can find these little lumps that it self-interacts in such a way that it holds itself together. Mm-hmm. And that's called a soliton. Okay. And it's also called a solitary wave. Okay. Because it's a lump that holds its shape as it propagates around in space-time. Okay. So I found one of these as a nonlinear solution in the Maxwell-Dirac equations that nobody else had. Okay. So I took it to the head of the department, which is a guy named Roger Dashin, and I showed him this numerical solution. And numerical solution, this is the 90s, so numerical solutions were kind of like, people don't really trust them. But he had done work in the 80s with solitons. Okay. So when he saw my work, he recognized there was something there. Wow. We emailed Sidney Coleman about it and heard back, and he's like, oh, this is interesting. But shooting from the hip, he said that, it's too big and it probably isn't anything physical. So nevertheless, Roger said, it'd probably make a good dissertation to write this up. So I started working on this, and I worked on that for a year, put out a paper on it. And then I was working on making that in my thesis when Roger Dashin died. Oh, wow. So we were at a conference. I forget who the speaker is, but I'm sure he remembers. But Roger was eating a sandwich and he choked on the sandwich during the seminar and had a massive coronary. Oh, rough stuff. Yeah, that was really rough. And so it was about 2 weeks after that, I'm like, do I finish up this dissertation? And who's gonna be my advisor? Yeah. Because it was a really weird topic. Yeah, right. And also this was the 90s and the whole physics community was going into string theory. Yeah, different angle, different direction. UCSD had just hired Ken Trilgater, which is a student of Winton's, who was working on ADS-CFT, which is a very popular mathematical correspondence in field theories and physics. But so I'm in Ken Trilgater's office, and he's like trying to figure out, like, well, this guy's a top student in the class. He was Roger Dashin's student. Do I want to take him on and work on strings? I'll interview him and, maybe bring him in. And so I'm in there talking to Ken Trilgater's, and he's describing ADS-CFT to me. And I'm like, so you want me to work on a correspondence between anti-de Sitter space and conformal field theory? And as far as we can tell, our universe is not anti-de Sitter. And as far as we know, the conformal field theory doesn't describe anything in our universe. Right. So you want me to spend my life working on a theory that is a correspondence between non-physical things
that we think don't exist. Yeah.
And at this point, I pretty much realized that the string theory community had just totally gone off the rails. Yeah. Okay. All right. They were just totally in mathematical fantasy land. Had totally lost connection to reality. You can look back, you can see like Witten and a few others working with Claude manifolds and things to connect to physical reality in the standard model.
Yeah.
Right. The standard model is wildly successful.
Okay.
Okay. It's describing, the set of quarks and electrons and forces and everything that interact and the Higgs boson and how that, undergoes symmetry breaking and gives mass to all the particles. That was all worked out in the 60s and 70s. And it worked really well.
Right.
And then with string theory, people just went into la la land.
Okay.
And they originally promised to connect to the standard model.
Right.
And that was, of all the things they could reproduce, that was one thing they couldn't easily reproduce. Whenever they tried to get close, they're like, oh, they're also these superparticles.
Right.
It's like, all right, well, we can get the standard model with the suitable geometry, probably, and there'll definitely be these superparticles.
Which we've never found.
So they built the LHC, and I found the Higgs, but really the LHC was designed to find superparticles.
So it was designed for that, because I know that the Large Hadron Collider managed to find all the things that you described from the 60s.
From the standard model, yeah. They found the Higgs.
But it didn't find any of the string theory stuff.
I went and visited CERN. It was like they had a banner up. It was like, welcome home, superparticles. They were ready. They had the champagne ready. They were ready to go.
And they never found any.
Zilch.
Yeah, and they would have.
Yeah.
Okay, so the soliton, if you can describe that thing, it should explain like how you turn waves into matter. Is that the idea?
So the idea in my head was that if you have purely fields and they're self-interacting fields, but they self-interact such that there's a lump that collides with other lumps, then that could be particles.
That could be matter.
The problem is they come out to be too big.
Oh, in what you discovered
with
so
the
far.
calculation. So maybe if there was some other force, then maybe they could realistically be particles. But I was working with electromagnetism, and with electromagnetism, it's too weak and they were too big.
Got it. So maybe that concept works with some force we don't know about yet.
Yeah. So anyway, I did not go with Ken Trilligator as my advisor. I went back to Henry Barbanel, who was my advisor for nonlinear dynamics.
Yeah.
And did my dissertation on my next on turbulent boundary layer flow.
Cool.
And I got my PhD, and I'm like, I looked at people like scrabbling for postdocs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, these people are like scrapping, like fighting super hard.
Yeah.
For tiny little peanuts of money.
And then you look at your trading account.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, but I really like tech.
Yeah.
And I could see tech, the tech explosion coming. So I bought myself a fancy suit and I interviewed with McKinsey.
Okay.
And I got this like stage 3 in the interview process, and they mostly liked me. So then they're like, okay, Garrett, where do you want to go? And I'm like, I want to go to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I want to go, I'll go work for McKinsey in SF. And
that wasn't really a thing though.
Yeah. And cause that's where the growth industry is. I'd love to do consulting for tech companies.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we want you in Los Angeles. We want you in the entertainment industry. And I have a love-hate relationship with Los Angeles. I went to UCLA for an undergrad, and it was fun. It was a great party school. I was half enjoying a social life and half in my head in the physics books.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go back to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. The surfing's crap. The water's polluted. You spend all your time in a car.
Right.
I didn't want that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And also tech wasn't there. I didn't want to work in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
I had an uncle who had employed me as a production assistant. I made a couple of fun rock videos with him.
Okay.
In the 80s. That was a different time. Damn.
What rock videos?
Oh God. One was,
we got to know.
one was Debbie Gibson.
Oh, wow.
And the other one was a guy with a Spanish name. I have to go back and find it.
Some Iglesias or something.
No, it wasn't Julio Iglesias.
Yeah.
It was some more obscure Spanish artist. It was pretty good.
That's right.
I remember I had to go specially to get Debbie Gibson Thai food because she wouldn't eat the craft services food that was perfectly good. But anyway, I was a little peon. It's fun. It's fun as hell to make rock videos because you're working like 48 hours straight.
Yeah.
But you get a ton of money afterwards.
Cool.
And it's fun. It's total chaos.
Yeah, yeah. I would love it. I was
the same music, same song is playing over and over again.
Well, yeah, and a Debbie Gibson song.
Oh my
that
God.
could be tough.
I blocked that from my memory.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go to LA, and they weren't going to send me to SF, so I ended up not going to McKinsey.
Yeah.
I still have the suit. It still fits.
Amazing.
So I ended up, there was a friend of mine who had started a social group in San Diego called Sifter for smart geeks. He has an internet name, so I'll just use his internet name, which is Simon Funk.
Okay.
And he was working on AI.
Yeah.
So he had invented in, I think, 1993 or so, because he was an undergraduate at UC San Diego at the age of 15. Brilliant guy. He had come up with what's called a fusion reflection network.
Okay.
which is basically a modern neural net.
All right.
So he's a little bitter that that he sort of semi-published his work, but couldn't get any real funding.
Yeah.
For his AI research, but that's always what he was doing. So anyway, I piled up with him, and we had a lot in common as sort of hedonistic, fun-loving atheists.
Yeah.
And we went hopping around California and then off to Hawaii. And Maui was sort of stuck out as the island that was the most geek friendly.
Okay.
But also it had the population density that I was used to from San Diego.
Oh, this all fits together now.
So Oahu was more crowded,
Yeah.
but Maui,
I just realized I'm old buddies with Reichardt. I see where
Yeah.
this goes.
yeah. All right. So there, I
You're in
bring
Maui
him,
with geeks.
I can bring him into the story. So Maui's very geek friendly. I ended up with him. I met Reichardt as well. Great
Yeah.
guy. This is turning my life story instead of
It's okay. This is fun though. Oh man. Maui for geeks. So you got a hold of a supercomputer.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was friends with the guys there who in the Air Force who were running supercomputers. So I did some work with them. One had this weird idea about applying Einsteinian geometric methods to thermodynamics, and it was kind of cool, but it didn't really go anywhere. But I still had this idea in my head. So I was bankrolled by Apple stock.
Yep.
Learning to surf better in windsurf, which is fantastic in Maui. And then kite surfing once that was invented.
Yeah.
And the whole time I was working on this problem that had bothered me, which is what's a good geometric description for electrons?
Yeah.
I was not megalomaniacal enough to say, I want to go after a theory of everything.
Yeah.
I just want to bring electrons into the fold,
Okay.
right? What's a geometric way of describing electrons?
Because at this point, you got the standard model, but it doesn't go far enough to explain how what makes up an electron. Like how
Yeah.
is it?
So an electron is described as a matrix of complex numbers.
Okay. It's just
That's not geometric.
an extraneous. I see.
It's a representation
Yeah.
space if you're doing group theory.
Yeah, but we're pretty sure they exist at this
Oh, yeah.
point.
And we're pretty sure that space-time exists. And we're pretty
Okay.
sure that Einstein's correct in describing it as four-dimensional geometry. And the forces can be described as geometry using what's called Yang-Mills theory and principal bundles.
But we can't tie them all together. I see.
You can tie general relativity and the forces together.
Yeah,
But electrons are just freaking different.
they're just
Spinners.
Yep.
Why spinners?
Yep.
So I was racking my brain on this, and around 2006, I was teaching physics at the local college,
Yeah.
and they offered me a tenure track teaching position.
Yeah.
But there was also this grant organization called FQXI, started by Max Tegmark and Anthony Aguirre, a couple of sort of out there but well-established physicists.
Yeah.
They got some funding from the Templeton Foundation, which is a religious foundation fundamentally, but I consider the money to have been successfully washed because the Foundational Questions Institute was run by Anthony and Max, and they basically gave out grants
Yeah.
to people doing unusual foundational work in physics.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, I'm out working on this stuff. I'll submit a grant. And I got it. I got this grant, and I turned down the teaching position because that was taking too much time to teach.
Okay.
So I went back just to surfing and working on physics. And the grant idea was that how to bring electrons into the fold.
Yeah.
And so I was working on that, and then I was spending some time at a friend's house. So I left Maui for a couple of years for the snow because I missed the mountains. So I went to Tahoe. A friend of mine named Rich was putting me up in his house because he had sold his tech company for a few million bucks. So he had a couple nice houses in Tahoe. So I was living in his guest house. So it was like the geek version of Kato Kalin, I guess. And which let me, I would snowboard and work on physics. That's all I would do. And I had this grant. So I had this grant support. And I found out that there was this unusually beautiful mathematical object called the E8 Lie group.
All right.
When I looked into it, it had spinners as part of its structure. So I'm like, well, what if you take the standard model in gravity and these electrons and quarks as spinners, you take this whole structure as an algebra and you fit it inside this algebra that's called E8, which is the largest simple exceptional Lie group. And you look at Lie algebra and you get a fit. And not only do you get a fit, but E8 has this other symmetry that allows you to map between electrons and muons and tau. So you get the 3-generation structure of the standard model. I'm like, oh my God, that's it.
Wow.
This is a mathematical structure. It's got to be in it. So it's got spinners in it. It's got potentially has 3 generations in it. It will hold all the forces and general relativity. And it was a pretty tight fit.
Yeah.
And not only that, but you can draw diagrams of it, of how all the charges work out in 8 dimensions and map it into 2, and it makes really pretty patterns for the charge patterns.
Yeah.
So I was working on this, and I went to a FQXI conference in Iceland, and I was presenting my work. And after I was presenting my work, I was sitting around a table, and other physicists were like coming up to talk to me.
Yeah.
And I've got a placard on, so I'm working on a theory of everything.
Yeah.
And usually guys with saying they're working on a theory of everything are the ones that people avoid.
Yeah. Right.
But the editor of New Scientist noticed that it was coming up to talk to me, and they had seen my talk, and they're like, okay, well, this seems pretty cool. I'm going to put a reporter on him.
Okay.
So she put Zia Morali on me to do a story on my work. And I'm like, oh, this is great. My parents will finally know what I'm working on. There'll be a popular description of it. But that's not what happened. What happened is I was talking with Zia, and the same time I was writing up the paper, I put the paper on the archive, which is the archive is what physicists use to exchange papers since the early 90s. It's the other thing that let me move to Maui. Is
because you could collaborate remotely.
Because I had access to papers remotely.
Yeah.
I didn't need a big academic library.
Right.
I could just go online, download papers over the internet. So the internet just totally provided me my freedom.
Yeah.
I was no longer anchored to an academic library. And so anyway, I'm working on this paper, put it on the archive. Zia has her paper ready to go out. And the weird way things work in publishing is, so New Scientist had this article on my work, but the announcement went out that this article was going to be published before it was actually published.
Okay.
And Roger Highfield is like looking at this funny New Scientist article, and then he's like, wait. The author of this is a surfer in Maui? So then the Telegraph, he wrote up an article about it's a surfer guy with this theory of everything that's getting traction.
Right.
So then the news story became almost as much about me being a surfer who had, come up with this theory as it was about the work itself.
Yeah.
Whereas, the New Scientist article I don't even think it mentioned I was a surfer. So now it became the news article about like the surf bum with the theory of everything that sort of spread worldwide and got me a lot of attention. Ended up at TED in 2008, where at dinner with Nathan Myhrvold, where he's telling me about intellectual ventures. Yeah. And I'm like, that's great. But if you're not actually making this stuff, then aren't the patents just slowing things down? Huh. So I wasn't that stoked on intellectual ventures. I mean, fantastic source of ideas, but I know you work for them, so I don't want to use the word patent troll, but I'm sure you've heard it before.
We've heard it all before. Heard it all before.
All right. And then, so the thing is I got a lot of attention. I got a lot of attention. I really just wanted to go back to Maui and work on my stuff. Yeah. But I went around giving talks for a while, which was fun.
But what happened with the controversy? I mean, was this the legitimate academic theoretical physicists are like, this is our turf. We can't have surfers playing here. I mean, is that what happened?
It was more the latter.
Yeah.
So the theoretical physicists mostly discarded the fact that I've been working on this for decades and I had a PhD. Yeah. And focused more on the part that, this is pretty pictures and, some surf bum who's probably a crank. Okay. And I ended up with a run-in with Jacques Dissler, who Eric Weinstein refers to as string theory's immune system. Uh-huh. So he came out of me in full condescending force. Uh-huh. So there were a bunch of debates online that mostly went in circles where he would totally refuse to acknowledge that I had done anything correct at all or had anything interesting going on at all, either of those things. So that was just incredibly frustrating. Yeah. And at the same time, Scientific American asked me to write an article. Okay. And I'm like, well, I'll seem like less of a crank if I get a co-author. So I got a co-author to work with me. He's a great guy. He's one of the reporters that done a story on me, but he also had a physics background. He was so frustrated with physics that he got a philosophy degree as well as a physics PhD because he wanted to be able to work on physics that he wanted to, which he didn't think he could do with the physics PhD. Yeah. So anyway, Jim and I wrote an article for Scientific American. That article was about to be published when Dissler found out about it and organized a bunch of other physicists and wrote Scientific American, wrote the editor and said, if you publish this article, we'll boycott your magazine.
Oh, wow. It was that big of a deal to them.
Oh, yeah. I was threat number one.
Yeah.
And I found out, I won't disclose my source, but I found out about this. Yeah. And there ended up being an internal debate behind closed doors in Scientific American where they went back and forth with physicists and they said, okay, well, what's actually wrong in the article? Point us to something that's actually mathematically incorrect.
That's the right thing to do.
There's nothing incorrect in that article.
Yeah.
So it turns out they weren't going to do it on the cover. It did not get the cover. Yeah. But they did publish the article. Okay. So I was happy about that. It's probably still one of the better popular level descriptions of the theory.
Great.
And at the same time, I got contacted by Hollywood. I go, God, I'm going back to Los Angeles to host some silly show on inventions. And I'm like, well, that sounds really fun. I love playing with inventions, and I love like inventions sort of move us into the future. So that sounds good to play with it, but I'm not good at talking.
Okay.
Right. I don't want to grill inventors and,
All right.
And I'm more of an introvert. I'm not really extroverted enough for television.
Yeah.
I come across with a very flat aspect,
Okay.
Under camera. But I know this guy who's really smart and knows a hell of a lot about inventions, and that was Rykart.
Amazing.
So I'm like, all right, well, I don't want to host your show, but maybe I have this friend, Rykart, and I think he'd be perfect for it.
Yeah.
And they're like, all right, so record some video and send us a demo reel. So with Rykart and I go back and forth, just, shooting it for 5 minutes, record it and send this off. And he's like, oh my God, you guys are great. Be our co-host. Be co-host on the show. So that's how Rykart and I ended up back in Los Angeles in his barn.
Oh, wow.
Co-hosting Invention USA.
Yeah.
Which was fun for one season.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to do it for another season.
Okay.
So they asked me to do it again for the second season. And I'm like, I don't want to do this again, but if you give me enough money, I'll do it.
Okay.
And they're like, we're not going to give you that much money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, I'm going surfing.
Yeah.
So they got a different co-host to deal with Rykart. I went for the second season and then not a third, but it was fun to do, but
yeah.
I feel traumatized because when you're doing a reality TV show, it is the job of the producers to make you look ridiculously bad.
Yeah.
They will put anything in front of you they can just to increase the entertainment value and make you trip up, look bad.
Yeah.
And just whatever they can.
Yeah.
And Rykart didn't help because Rykart's like 6'2", and his run.
I'm just shocked anybody put him on television is the truth. I mean, it just really.
He's a highly entertaining character.
He's totally entertaining.
He's like he would be a perfect candidate for the most interesting guy in the world. He's just like he would captivate an audience. But he made it a running joke. I'm 6 feet tall, but he made it a running joke to make himself always loom over the camera. And he talked about, I saw an interview later that a friend recorded and he didn't know I saw, where he talked that he was doing this on purpose to make himself look really big and me look small. So he whenever he'd stand somewhere, he'd like try to stand on a little hill or stand in front. And when he chose the camera person to film him, he chose the shorter one to film him. So his the angle would be up more.
Oh my God.
These tricks. Oh my God. It's still fun to do for a year, but it was stressful. So I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I think I gained like 20 pounds from Ben and Jerry's while shooting that show.
I'm not trying to do television shows.
Yeah, no, they're stressful. So you got the wardrobe for it, all black. That's industry standard.
Is it? I think that's for backstage.
Yeah.
I can be backstage. I can be a roadie.
Exactly.
I don't want to be on TV.
Yeah. That's the backstage uniform.
I don't like the medium. I think it's so contrived. And that's why I like podcasts. Like you can they're unrestrained. Make it as long as we want, go deep and whatever. And if people don't like it, they can skip it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some really great ones out there. I mean, the Lex Friedman and Eric had the Portal for a long time. And it was sad what happened to Eric though. He basically stopped making his podcast because he was getting death threats and threats against his family. And he's like, this just isn't worth it.
From who?
Cranks.
Who didn't like what he was talking about?
Yeah.
No.
Tim Ferriss described this the best actually.
Yeah.
He wrote an article about being a medium famous.
Yeah.
And if you're like super famous, then you have like maybe guards and people to help you and stuff to wall you off and protect you.
Right.
But if you're medium famous,
yeah,
most people will leave you alone.
Right.
But the people who are a little loopy and perhaps dangerous,
right,
they're loopy and dangerous, so they don't have inhibitions.
Yeah.
So they'll go after you.
Yeah.
And so when you're medium famous, you got crazy people coming out of the woodwork, talk to you, get your attention, get something from you.
Yeah.
Whatever it is they want. And it's kind of horrible. So being medium famous it's fun because you get more attention.
Yeah.
But it's also a little sketchy because you got the mentally ill contacting you all the time.
Yeah. I think that for listeners, it means don't tell anyone about this podcast.
Right.
Or tell 1,000 people about the podcast because it's only got to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It is so sad to hear that, he didn't stop doing it for that reason.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine if you don't want to do it, but if you're afraid or feel like you're attracting this kind of negative attention, that is just really uncool.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was a little worried in Tahoe when I was getting that famous because I was getting a lot of criticism and my girlfriend was like, are these people going to come to our door and like hunt us down?
Yeah.
And it was a little better when I'm in Maui, because when I'm in Maui, I have a huge moat.
Okay.
And it's harder for people to get there.
A huge moat called the Pacific Ocean. Good sized moat.
Yeah. I like the sharks.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
that was a little better.
Well, look, I come from a long line of heretics, computer hackers. They're not legitimized in academia in any sense. Nathan, almost famously, is not entrenched in the academic environment.
Yeah.
Working for him was delightful for that reason, because we were not beholden to anyone else's game.
Yeah.
We didn't have to get grants. It's a real luxury. In
my understanding is you had a bunch of brilliant minds in a conference room shooting ideas back and forth.
Yeah.
And a bunch of lawyers taking notes for the patents.
Yeah, that's basically true. There's more to it than that, but that's basic idea. And we were just beholden to no one. And it really was freeing, because we could, we had to be intellectually honest, and we had to be accountable to what is known that's true. And which I think is, that's a real good North Star. And unfortunately, a lot of these really just human-made structures suffer from a lot of, screwy incentives and entrenched power structures and things that really should have nothing to do with science, but are fucking things up. So I try to be really open to heretics and to the people who've been dismissed by the establishment, just to see if we can respect their intelligence and their ideas, and I think that's important, because for inventors in particular, almost like you described, the inventions are at the borders of different areas in science and technology. And so the generous way of referring to those people is generalist, like you said. But the truth is, those are people who, often in defiance of the sort of academic hierarchy, got curious and experimented or played or learned in multiple areas.
Yeah.
And it might be, physics and surfing, or it might just be, even two areas in physics that to the outsider observer look like the same thing. But if you're in the system, you're really siloed. And so I think it's really important to preserve the few places in the world where people who've been canceled by science, Eric Weinstein or whatever, for whatever you think about the individuals, a lot of times you want to separate your opinion about them or their behavior or their, pedigree or whatever from their ideas, and really give them some respect. It sounds like you got a mix of both.
I did.
Some people gave you time of day to take a look at this, and that's really great. Yeah. And then you also got the bullshit that comes from people who are trying to protect their, pedigree or something.
Yeah, I have been, I think the word is Schadenfreude for It's Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Schadenfreude. Yeah. I'm horrible at pronouncing
it. It's okay.
Yeah. It's because I read these things.
I get it. I know. That's all right.
But to see the collapse of string theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been a lot of Schadenfreude.
Do you think that that's widely accepted now, or are people still hanging on?
It's so pervasive now through our culture.
String theory the
collapse.
The collapse.
The fact that it didn't work.
Okay. So it's getting more widely accepted that we're done with that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not widely accepted by the string theory leadership.
Yeah, I get it.
They're still on
They're still living the dream.
Yeah, exactly. They're on the top of a pyramid that is eroding behind them. So it's more like a diamond shape now.
Yeah.
Because the graduate students aren't going into physics, they're going into AI.
Yeah.
That's where the action is.
Right.
Yeah. There hasn't been real action in theoretical physics for 50 years.
Yeah.
But I was just looking at an interview with Altman,
Sam
Altman, and at the end of the interview, when Lex asks him, all right, well, if you have a super intelligent AGI, what question do you ask it? And he thinks for a bit. He's like, well, I'd ask it, is there a grand unifying theory of physics?
Yeah.
And what is it? So really, we're after the same thing. It's just my competition now is AI.
Well, it's one of these things where I think that, it's almost like an easy way to think about it is just resolution. If you have an Atari, then like an alien made of 8 blocky pixels is the enemy. That's the whole game. A square the ball in Pong is square. It's fucking square. Square balls. You don't need to be a physicist of any description to tell you that square balls don't do in any way, shape, or form whatever kind of balls you're talking about.
No, you
euphemistic
see
or
a
otherwise.
square ball and you move
Yeah.
on from there. Yeah.
Yeah. So but then, as we progress, now we're on PlayStation 5 and the balls are nice and round.
Yeah.
And it's not just that, like everything is photorealistic. And so once you,
And now you put on a VR helmet and the balls are in your face if you want them to be, but
yeah, for sure. Balls in your face. Right.
depending on which way you go. I don't know.
Apple Vision for teabagging. I don't know what this is.
No,
Okay.
Apple Vision isn't so keen. Apple is sort of a walled garden for media.
Yeah, they were pretty adamant about trying to make sure nobody used it for anything really fun.
Yeah.
I was able to fix that.
Yeah.
So
I heard there were ways.
Apple Vision, I'd buy some stock in Apple Vision now because I can tell you it's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
What I think is going on though is for something like resolution in images, we have a frame of reference because we can always compare it to what we see with our eyes. We could see the real world with our eyes, like that screen is low res, that frame rate is not good enough. We don't have a frame rate problem with our eyeballs.
No.
And I mean, except in weird cases. So you by and large have this notion of what resolution should be.
Yeah.
And we've been working towards that in rendering for a long
But what
time.
has helped is as humans, we have amazing capability to project ourselves into these abstract realities.
Yeah, that is also true.
Yeah.
And that's a super cool thing.
Yeah.
But something analogous to resolution applies to everything else that is not images, except that we don't have that frame of reference. So we don't actually know how good a resolution do we need to start really understanding the next level.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what theoretical physics is like we need to increase the resolution of our understanding to go smaller and smaller and smaller and get, subatomic and subatomic and whatever it is.
That's what particle colliders are, is they're big microscopes.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
big microscopes. And so we want to go, oddly, to go smaller, you go bigger. So we
Yeah.
want to get to that, that resolution. We may just uncover like, oh shit, now we need 12 more orders of magnitude, more resolution to go to the next level.
Come on, man. Just one more collider.
Yeah, I know.
One more collider.
Just one more
that's all I
collider.
want.
Just a large hadron. We need an
We'll
extra
find it,
large
man. We'll
hadron
find it.
collider. The extra large hadron collider will get us there.
It's true, though. It's true. It's like the most
Yeah.
magnificent pursuit of humankind that we
Yeah.
could possibly do is find out what the ultimate constituents of matter are.
And that is super
It's just
cool.
now it's getting
Yeah.
kind of energetically engineering expensive to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's it's certainly a noble cause, but
The other thing is, maybe we have enough knowledge now. Maybe with what we already know, we can see the big picture.
and for a whole lot of things that we couldn't, and I'm saying resolution, but another
Yeah.
way of contextualizing that is in our models, all models suffer from this resolution problem.
Yeah.
And if you make a model of a Tesla before you build it, we're pretty good at the physics now. We can model. We know this alloy of, this particular stainless steel might show fingerprints, but it's stronger than the one that doesn't, whatever.
Yeah.
So we can model all those properties physically for everything that matters in a Tesla. We don't need to know about electrons other than like for wires.
Right.
We don't need to know about what's happening with electrons in order to model a Tesla.
Yeah.
So we can do that.
Classical physics and electromagnetism are great
Yeah.
for the car.
Yeah.
Quantum mechanics for the chip, sure, but other than that, you just classical physics.
Yeah. And we're good enough.
And engineering.
And 10 years ago, we could not have, I don't think we couldn't have modeled a Tesla to the level of resolution we can
No
now.
way.
And now we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
And there's nothing left to be desired in as far as our ability to model a Tesla. Like
No.
you cannot, there's nothing left to want. Like
Right.
the windshield wiper connector is modeled and the material it's made
Yeah.
of, and we know exactly the breaking point. We know what,
How many years until we
aerodynamic
can do
effect
that
has.
for a human?
Exactly right. So that's the point. Now we can model Teslas and we can model, starships and stuff, but can we model a human? And can we model
Protein
the
folding.
climate?
We
And
just
can
did.
Right. We
Yep.
did to an extent, but I think to me, we get distracted by all these so-called breakthroughs in AI and in computational modeling, which are great, but a lot of them are just hacks to make it efficient enough that we can make a model because we can't afford the computation for the full resolution.
It's funny, you can see these things like computer science is this one field where you build something and you're like, okay, this sort of works.
Yeah.
And you have this structure that kind of works, kind of does the thing. And then, but it doesn't really get you the ability that you want.
Yeah.
And then you wait and computers get faster and faster and faster exponentially.
Yeah.
And it's like 10 years later, it's like, yeah, now I can do exactly what I want with the same algorithm in a
A
second.
same algorithm.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think that people are misunderstanding, is that the miracle of artificial intelligence that we're experiencing now is because of computation.
Yeah.
Less because of geniuses at AI companies or because of deep learning or
I
transformers.
should go back and find it. But in 1984,
Yeah.
I was programming, I think it was in BASIC, AppleSoft BASIC, on an Apple II Plus.
Yeah. In 84? That would have been late for 2 Plus, because you could have at least had a 2E with twice the RAM.
No, I had a 2 Plus.
I had a 2
upgraded.
Plus. There
Yeah.
weren't very many of those.
No. And,
48K.
and
But by 84, I was using a Mac. Well, that's when the Mac came out.
I think it was just
It could have been 2 Plus. Could have been 2 Plus.
Yeah, it was
84.
just pre-Mac.
Yeah.
But I was using it for word processing.
Okay.
So I had a bunch of essays I had written for school
Yeah.
using the word processor on floppy disks. And I was thinking, well, what would happen if I just assigned weights to words that follow other words
Wow.
and ran my essays through it. And the weights would connect these words to other words, depending on how far they were and which structures. And if I just made a weighted distribution and then fed it some words, how would it complete?
You invented small language models.
Exactly.
Yeah. And interestingly,
It spat out utter gibberish.
yeah. Oh,
But
you tried it though.
Oh yeah, I programmed it up and ran it, and it spat out gibberish. I fed it like 12 essays,
Yeah.
and it just gave me, and it was like they were words, and they were words after another that sort of go after it did what you would expect it to do.
Oh God. But the thing is, like, you had no hope because
No,
the
computation wasn't
computational
there.
requirements
Exactly,
were totally implausible
Exactly.
until recently.
and that was the fate that befell my friend Simon Funk in the.
So Simon
in the 90s.
Funk's idea, if we take that now and apply like absurd computation to it,
That's it.
it'll work.
That's it. It's the same as, seems pretty clear at the time he was talking. Is it Jeff Hinton? I think he was talking to, who blew him off, but pretty much took his ideas and ran with them.
Wow.
And then just got a hold of vast amounts of computational power.
Yep. There you go.
And also friends with Sean Legg and DeepMind, those guys. He's very connected with all these people.
Sure. Yeah.
And he's a wonderful, brilliant geek who would talk about his ideas to anybody who would listen.
Yep. There you go.
And also built a 3D world called 3D Anarchy
All right.
that was predated Second Life and was better, and that people would run it on private servers,
Okay.
like you'd run Apache to serve HTML
Sure.
pages. He'd serve these 3D environments,
Okay.
but it was much less unregulated, and he had no clue about monetization.
Right.
So he ended up partnering with a guy, and then they sold the company to Adobe, and he worked for Adobe, and it's called, what did Adobe called it? It wasn't 3D Anarchy. I forget what Adobe
But they
called
produced it.
Yeah, they produced it, and they ran it, and then they killed it.
Huh.
I don't remember exactly why they killed it, but he ended up, he's raising a family in a decent house, but the guy should be worth $1 billion. And he just,
Well, we'll go.
he would say he did not have business ethics.
Business ethics?
He did not have business ethics. So in other words, he was not enough of a sociopath to become a billionaire.
That's called business ethics.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
I love it.
Yeah, pretty much every business partner.
Where is he based?
He was in San Diego. That's right. And then
okay.
he lived in Maui for quite a while, and now he's in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, that's a cool ride.
He's also good friends with Reichardt.
Yeah.
It's such a freaking small world, isn't it?
It is. I know. I really want to get Reichardt to spend time with me on the podcast, but I figure we need like 30 hours.
Oh yeah. Like wear a diaper.
Because there's so many things, and I can't seem to. I mean, we're both like jet setters, so overlapping is hard. But we'll get to it.
Yeah. Well, he also has a love-hate relationship with the media.
Yeah, I know.
Like he does everything he possibly can to keep an article off of Wikipedia about him.
Yeah, I know. But we'll get some good stuff out of him. He's up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this whole thing was, almost decades ago now with the new theory.
Oh yeah, physics-wise. Well,
and then
I pretty much there was such a distaste in my mouth from all the criticism I was getting from the string. Basically, string theory was sinking like a ship.
Yeah.
Like a sinking ship going down, but the last thing they were doing with their cannons is firing at me.
Okay.
And I'm like, I don't need this.
Yeah, right. Hence surfing.
And this is like this Lisi's guy's a crank who should just go back to Maui and go into obscurity. And I'm like, that sounds really good.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, great. We agree on something.
I'm going to go back to Maui.
Yeah.
I'm going to surf. I'm going to kite. I'm going to travel and surf. I'm going to snowboard. And I'm going to work on physics on my own without anybody else's involvement, which is the way I'm the happiest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been working on this for another 10 years. What I've been working on now is how to bring a geometric description, not only of electrons, but of quantum field theory itself into the theory.
Wow.
So basically in quantum field theory, at the heart of it is you have creation and annihilation operators for particles. Okay. And these satisfy an algebra called the Heisenberg algebra.
Yeah.
Which is also called the canonical commutation relation. But essentially it's just another algebra.
Okay.
So then the question is, how do you bring that algebra into the fold with a unifying algebra? Okay. So if somehow E8 is a description of the geometry of particles, how do you bring this Heisenberg algebra in as part of it?
Okay.
And it turns out that a mathematician figured out how to do this in the late 80s.
Okay.
At Berkeley, named Richard Borcherd's. And these are called Borcherd's algebras or generalized Lie algebras. And the thing about them is, since if you imagine a laser beam, you can have an arbitrary number of photons in a laser beam. You just pump more power into it, you get an arbitrary number.
Okay.
So whereas in algebra, you have a finite number of different kinds of elementary particles. In a full quantum field theory, you have an infinite number of possible excited states. Okay. So this means you're dealing with an infinite dimensional algebra.
Yeah.
And dealing with infinite dimensional algebras is a lot harder.
Yeah.
So this is what I've been working on for the last decade, is how to basically combine quantum field theory and unified theories in a unified framework.
All right.
Where everything plays nice together.
How's it looking?
Pretty good. I'm working on a paper.
Wow, good.
But I've been working on that paper for over a year now.
Yeah, right.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
Also, I'm almost certainly not going to get it completely right.
Yeah.
But I'll put the ideas out there. People will say they're wrong, and other people will maybe pick them up and run with them, or at least parts of them.
You know, I'm a bit of a lightning rod for heretics in physics, among other things. If you want some co-conspirators, I might be able to help you out, who would be open to...
The only collaborations I've liked is they've helped me, I'd say helped me socially or culturally.
Yeah.
Whereas for me to be happy with the paper, I've had to write it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I'm mostly just happy working on my own, but I've had some people help in various areas.
All right.
Most people don't pass my tests.
Yeah, fair enough.
So if someone really wants to work with me, I give them a couple problems.
Yeah.
And and usually what happens is I don't hear from them again.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you want to help? Okay, here's this thing I figured out. See if you can figure it out.
Yeah, I noticed that yesterday. Actually, we're on the mountain, and these guys are like, "Oh, what's up with those boots?" And you're like, "Oh, see if you can follow me." And I'm like, standing around explaining the boots, and like, oh god, it's like, if you're still hanging around at the bottom of the mountain, I'll explain.
Right.
Yeah. Great. That's great. Okay.
It's how I love to do things.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Good.
Let me show you what can happen.
Yeah.
And well, that's like one of the great geek stories is let me show you this cool thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And take it, run with it however you want.
So when you have to justify surfing or snowboarding on an intellectual basis, like why it's so important to do so much of it, what do you got?
I have so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So surfing, spending time with my wonderful girlfriend, Samantha.
Yeah.
These things bring me great happiness.
Okay.
It doesn't help the physics any.
Yeah.
It's a distraction, but man, it makes me happy.
Yeah.
And ultimately my work in physics isn't that important that if I don't do it, that it'll never get done.
Great self-awareness. I'm not that big a deal. I can surf if I want and the world won't miss me. Good.
Yeah. And I'm not the best surfer either.
Fair enough.
But I might be the best surfing physicist.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you specialize enough, you can be the best.
Right, there you go.
But yeah, and also studies have shown that physical activity makes you smarter.
Yeah.
So also, if I am working hard on physics and I take a break to go surfing, it helps break me out of ruts.
Yeah, good.
And I can come back to it with fresh eyes and make progress, whereas before I was just stuck.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. Also, surfing is just the most freaking fun you can have on the planet.
Yeah.
It's just really amazingly fun. But
why is surfing more fun than snowboarding?
The immersion in nature. So in snowboarding, you're very much on the mountain.
Yeah.
When you're surfing, and say if it's in a barrel, you're in the wave.
Mm.
And it's all moving, or everything around you is moving. A mountain is more or less stationary.
Got it.
Unless you're in an avalanche, which is bad news. You don't want to do that. But surfing, you're basically in a moving mountain. So it's much more dynamic. There's much more going on. There's a lot of variability in the shape and everything. And, you know, I come down a run and I make 100 turns down that run.
Yeah.
And each one of them feels good on a carving board, you know, making these big curving arcs with, as you know, which is a rare thing to share. It's really fun.
Yeah.
But I don't remember one turn or the other.
I see.
Whereas if I make a really good turn on a really good wave, I remember.
Wow. Is it partly
amazing.
because it's so rare and so hard to get everything
It's
to
a lot
line
of
up
work.
to
It's,
make
it's
it
the
seems-
hardest thing in the world to learn to
It
do well.
seems like such a pain in the ass to hang out in the water forever waiting for a wave. And I'm not built for it. I like to have a machine drop me off at the place, you know, optimized for time, I guess.
Yeah.
When you think about and I have my way of describing it, but when you think about the history of snowboarding and how it got on the wrong fork, obviously,
Right.
how do you describe that?
Well, snowboarding, they started out, the boards had skegs. They had fins on the bottom.
Yeah. Right.
So it came from surfing.
Yeah.
And then they also added, and then they took off the fins, they added the bindings.
Yeah.
And then it became very much its own thing.
Yeah.
And then there was this branch of the 90s of these surf bums like Jerry Lopez, who went out and got the carving boards.
Yeah.
And we're here at Buttermilk.
Oh.
Laying turns on the carving boards. And it was pure surfing.
Yeah.
These are long power surfing turns.
Okay.
That's exactly what they are. With the narrow race boards, the hard boots on plate bindings that really let you put the board on edge and carve those beautiful long turns. And that was pure surfing. And that's what I got into.
Yeah.
So then I moved I was in Colorado, I think in 2003 and 2004.
Okay.
Right before I moved back to Maui and got the FQXI grant.
Yeah.
And just riding the mountains of Colorado on a carving board was the most fun thing ever.
Mm.
It was almost so that I hated powder days.
Yeah. Right.
Because making turns on these race boards is so much fun.
Yeah.
But it's died out. You're one of the only other carvers I've met in a long time.
Same here.
And the other ones I meet are like 80.
Yeah, I know. I see one like once a year, and it's usually in Europe.
Yeah.
Because I had, skied as a kid growing up in Alaska.
Yeah.
And then I switched in 1989. I switched to snowboarding because my friends had switched to snowboarding, but you had to fucking hike.
Yeah.
And I'm
Like,
like,
they wouldn't let you on the lifts.
they wouldn't let us on lifts.
Yeah, I remember.
I'm like, I'm not hiking. It's nothing is worth that much effort to me.
I was in California. So the Big Bear Snow Summit, they opened that up to snowboarders in like 86 or so.
Yeah. So in 89, our I think was when our mountain opened up to snowboarding.
Yeah.
And I had a choice. I could either buy a ski rack to put my skis on for my little 2-seater Honda CRX.
Yeah.
Or I could buy,
those are fun cars.
they were amazing. It was an amazing car.
Yeah.
I wish I still had that. And then or I could buy a snowboard that would fit inside.
Yeah.
So I got the snowboard, I switched. But in those days that was also the year the first pair of boots made for snowboarding was made.
Yeah.
And before that, you just wore Sorels.
Yeah.
And everybody broke an ankle every year. And I'm like,
it was
I'm
floppy as hell.
not signing up for that.
Yep.
But these were firmer boots made for snowboarding. And so I'm like, okay, now's the time. So in 89, I got a late start on snowboarding in 89.
Yeah.
And then I wrote all the floppy shit. It wasn't floppy. It was but it was before the half pipe craze.
Yeah.
And I think what happened is snowboarding got on the X Games and stuff on television. It was all the half pipes. And
it was all skateboarding influence.
It was all skateboarding influence. And so then all the equipment, floppy boots and bindings, twin tip boards, duck footed stances,
all skating,
all that stuff. I was like, what the hell are you doing? If you watch videos of like the snowboarders back in the 80s, Craig Kelly, their stance, even though they don't have hard boots, is like ours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because then you can bring
that's
back,
a race stance. Yeah.
Yeah. You can bring the back knee forward. You can lower your center of gravity, like everything's stable and locked down. And these kids have this like wide gorilla stance. I think they have no idea what they're missing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so then I ended up,
riding one of these things now, I feel like an alien coming down the hill.
No, me too.
It's like, what is that?
I am an
you
alien,
get shouts,
for
you get
sure.
hollers. It's like,
Yeah, I got it. Then I got it at a swap meet, which it was a normal thing in Alaska where you bring your old gear and swap it for other people's old gear. Yeah. In Alaska, everything you bought in the 80s would take 6 to 8 weeks to be delivered.
God.
Yeah. So swap meet was...
No Savior Jeff Bezos yet to send you anything.
We didn't have any of that. No, you would literally lick a stamp to order skateboards. And so I got it. Somebody was casting off this race board with hard boots and bindings and everything for like $75 or something.
Yeah.
So I got the whole thing. I'm like, oh, cool, I'll try it. And I fucking loved it.
Yep.
And so then I never turned back. And but I never, it's cool because now we have YouTube, so I can see videos of other guys doing extreme carving, and I learned a little bit from them because they know, I was on my own figuring this out, and I didn't ever race or anything, but I, trying to figure out equipment, how to set things up, what the techniques were. I had to figure that all out on my own. Yeah. And so I've known for a long time I was an alien, but
but I don't mind. YouTube community for you.
Yeah, YouTube helped. There's, you watch a YouTube video on extreme carving, and there's like 17 other views, and you're like, oh wow, they're out there somewhere, my people.
That's right.
Yeah.
It does bother me that there's such a high barrier to entry to carving now because it's so obscure. That it's
obscure,
so
which makes it expensive. I know we're down to like one brand that makes bindings and two brands that make boots, I guess. But there's 6 brands that make boards. So that's a start. Oh god. Fortunately, it's tough stuff. I get a lot of years out of my bindings. I haven't had to replace those.
These bombers.
Yeah, they're titanium bindings. I mean, that's working. And then, but I don't know. Yeah, I think people are missing out. I know it looks weird when you're on the mountain.
That is one of the greatest things of our age is when revolutions happen and there's change.
Yeah.
Right? Because we are in a growth-oriented culture.
Yeah.
I mean, people at the time used to say, okay, buggy whips are going away.
Right.
It's not what happens. What happens is now you can still get great buggy whips.
Right.
Much better than were made in the 1780s or something. It's a much more small niche community.
Yeah, and you can find the buggy whip junkies if you want.
Exactly.
I mean, I remember it changed my life because, I got online in 1982 on a mainframe.
Yeah.
I was a kid, but I finagled my way onto the mainframe at the university. And there were no pictures on the internet. Yeah. So nobody knew that I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so I could
on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog.
Yeah. I could just harass computer science professors 16 hours a day. Like, hey, how's this work? And so, I'm in, at the time I was in Soldotna, Alaska, which is like, one of the, it's only 3 hours from the comparatively civilized big city of Anchorage, which has 250,000 people. So, I had 3,000 people in our town, very small.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone else had a computer. I was like very isolated. And so it was, being able to learn or hang out with anyone who was a peer of any description, with that interest was impossible at the time. And, I learned things really the hard way, but then seeing as the internet grew, not really, BBS has helped some for nerds through the 80s and 90s. But once we got to like 95, when everybody could get online and you could start to see those niche groups on Usenet all finding each other.
Yeah. And now Reddit. Yeah.
Now it's Reddit. Yeah. But it's so weird that.
Or Discord if you're more alternative. Yeah.
Yeah. We have the same things as before. Instead of IRC, we have Discord and Slack, I guess. And instead of, Usenet, we have Reddit. I don't know. It's kind of bizarre. Instead of like FidoNet, we have BitTorrent.
Well, it is kind of sad that these things all were the result of privatization.
Yeah.
So Usenet was very publicly run
for sure,
but then Reddit came by and ate its lunch and did ostensibly a better job, but privately owned. And I think they just went public.
Yep, they did.
Yeah.
But I think there's it might be a fantasy, but I believe there's a cycle to these things where we go from open protocols into centralized walled garden services.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually we'll get pissed off enough and that'll get broken up by an open protocol. And you can see how like TCP/IP destroyed AOL, even though AOL, had a head start and all that. And TCP/IP was arguably like a worse user experience, but the open, decentralized, distributed protocol won out. And I think we're just at this moment of time where, everybody ran into a big walled garden of Facebook and all its derivatives. And, you can see.
Not only that, there used to be like FTP and Gopher and all these other protocols. And then HTML took over and it became the web.
Yeah.
Now I'm a little worried that,
Well, that wasn't the problem. It wasn't HTTP and that became the problem. It was all of the walled gardens built on top of that. Facebook, Instagram, even Reddit, all these things. And so I think you can see the backlash has little roots here and there, and that's all this stuff that nobody wants to use. Blue Sky and Matterhorn or whatever these things are
Mastodon.
called. Mastodon.
My favorite mathematical physicist is on Mastodon. Yeah, John Baez. He does amazing stuff. That's why I first learned about E8. Is from
I think the physicists are really into Mastodon.
Yeah,
as far as I can tell. But hopefully we'll figure out how to get these things to take off, because I think they can really be better. Yeah. All right, cool. Anything else we should talk about?
This has been, as promised, a wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah, I think it's very cohesive in my mind. People are going to love it.
Very tech-focused.
Yeah.